Did you ever snoop through your parents' things as a child and absolutely regret what you found to this day? What was it and did they ever find out? Not as a child, but as an adult. And it's not gonna be NSFW, just sad. I was spending a few days over to my mom's house in the countryside, and she was cleaning up some of her stuff. I stumbled upon a diary that dated back to 1992, when I was barely a year old. I was curious, so I asked her if I could read it. She said yes, but warned me that I might not like what she had written in it at the time. I went ahead and read it anyway. And what I learned was that my father never cared much for me, even back then. He'd still do drugs and smoke pot with me in the next room, and let mom pay for everything pertaining to my needs. I brought the diary to my mom, and asked her if my father ever loved me at all, her diary still in my hand. She sat me down, and confessed that, when she was pregnant with me, she knew she wanted to have me, but my father never did. What I regret is having the absolute certainty that one of my parents never did love me. Before, there was always a sliver of hope, but now, I know my father never really loved me. Unfortunately, yes. My dad's father was a fighter pilot during WI. Immediately after the war, he was still flying for the Air Force when he crashed his plane into a mountain and died on his way home from a training mission. My dad had a bunch of artifacts from the wreckage, small things that they could bring off the mountain. It took 2 weeks of searching to find the wreckage, and 5 days of hiking up the mountain to get there, which he got after his mom passed away. I was 14. A couple of years later, I wanted to show the artifacts to a friend. Went in my dad's closet to find them, but what I found instead was a 12-inch long, thick, black dildo. I immediately closed the bag it was in, and never went looking for the artifacts again. However, a few years later, I was about 20, and dating this guy. My parents were out of town for the weekend, so he was staying over at my house. He thought of himself as a musician, and asked if we could record him singing and playing guitar. So, I got out the video recorder, and, not wanting to record over anything important, I played the tape that was in it to be sure. It was a homemade sex tape my parents made. I about died. Thankfully I didn't actually see them doing it, because it was right at the beginning, still fully clothed, making out on their bed. I noped out of that real quick. Never did record him singing. Which is fine cause he sucked. I wasn't snooping. But when I was about 14 I was helping mom do laundry like I usually did on Saturdays when I was a kid. I went to put away my dad's shirts and found a Costco size box of condoms. It was nearly full. On that didn't bother me. I knew what sex was and figured my parents did it. The troublesome bit was the following Saturday when I was helping with laundry and saw 3 condoms in the drawer instead of 24. I mean, damn guys, it's been a week. When I was little I always liked going in my parents' closet. Their closet is above the garage, so it is massive. There aren't any windows, so I liked going there during the day, to be in the dark. They kept a lot of random stuff in the very back, so I always thought it was fun to go through. It wasn't until it got around Christmas time, when my parents said I was not allowed to go in their closet anymore, which naturally made me want to go in there even more. I waited until they were distracted with something and went in. I went to the very back where I like to explore, and found a bunch of wrapped Christmas presents. A few weeks later I got those same presents but from Santa. This really confused me as an 8-year-old. Why would Santa bring the gifts early, just to have to come back later to out them out on Christmas Eve? I guess it must make it easier and definitely would make the sleigh lighter. After my dad passed away I found some letters sent to him from his family that dated 40 years ago requesting him to marry his distant cousin so they can keep the family blood pure. He was 32 and she was 11. Side note, Middle Easterns have this weird thing with marrying underage girls who also are your distant/close cousins. I found other letters from his relatives saying that they are cutting ties from him because he refused to marry and that he is no longer welcomed in the country. They had the power to blacklist him. My dad ran away shortly after the first letter that I mentioned and met my mom, who's Bulgarian. who's also 2 years younger than him, and got married. Honestly, I'm just proud of him. My dad's journal from before I was born. He was so incredibly depressed. He talked about how my older sister cried on her way to kindergarten, and it was the first time he'd been able to relate to her in years. Totally broke my heart. I've never told him though. That was definitely not meant for me to read. This is a little different. I wasn't exactly going through my parents' stuff, but through their emails, because I was trying to find some pictures from years ago. I found an email from my mum to my ballet teacher. I was suicidal from when I was 9, and it was an email detailing why I was being bullied to the point of not wanting to live anymore, and how it made my mum question everything she had ever done or said to me. For a bit of context, I had just had a meltdown about how I hated school and wanted to stab myself with a kitchen knife to get away from what I was feeling. It was very surreal to read it. I can remember going through it, but that email just screamed despair to me, and I wanted to hug my mum really tight. I regret reading it because it made me feel like I did back then. I don't care if this gets buried. I just wanted to share what I'm feeling right now. My parents got divorced when my dad was caught cheating on my mom. After the divorce, I went to visit my dad-in-law when I was about 13. I decided to snoop through his bin of floppy disks and found a very long story he had typed out during the divorce. In it, he describes graphic sexual acts with the new woman. How his life would be easier if my mom was to suddenly drop dead. Specifically that he would fantasize about the police showing up at his door to tell him my mom was killed in a car accident. I also learned how his AOL name that he'd been using for years is actually just an inside joke between him and his now wife about the length of his dick. He still uses that name to this day. He did find out that I saw it, and he explained that at the time of the divorce he was seeing a therapist who told him to write the story. I think it was meant for the therapist to read and gain some insight into what my dad was going through. Oh my god, yes. I was 8. Wasn't really snooping through my parents' stuff, but our family photo albums. Particularly with mine and my siblings as babies. First, I got to my brother's. It was so colorful and bright, and filled with notes written by my mom. Same with my little sisters. Then I got to mine. It was boring to say the least. Just plain pictures with no notes or stickers or whatsoever. Then I got to the last page. I remember the exact verbatim of what I read in this small piece of blue sticky paper written by my mom. Is there any more I can say? No. Because we really wanted a baby girl. An 8-year-old boy bawled that day. When I was a kid, there were no such thing as cell phones and we didn't have magazines, so going to the bathroom was pretty boring. One way I used to entertain myself was by playing with a round piece of rubber that sat in the medicine cabinet. I would poke it, stretch it, spin it on my finger. Wasn't until several years later during sex ed that it suddenly dawned on me that I had been playing with my mother's diaphragm that whole time. I found hentai in my mum's room when I was 13, and I watched it out of curiosity. I was like, why does this cartoon look like it might be a porn? Anyway, I found out I like hentai, but I don't really like knowing that my mom gets off to the same flavor of stuff as me. Sometimes that still pops up in my brain, and I got to forcefully repress. My mom never found out I watched her VHS hentai. I think it was called Adventure Kid, something like that. I think I was actually in there looking for Macup. She wouldn't let me buy Macup, so I used to steal hers. When I was about 15, we moved from one town to another. While moving, somehow some photographs fell out of the back of the drawer that my sister, 3 years older, and I were lifting out of the van. Our hands were full, and we both looked at those photographs spread on the sidewalk. Pictures of our mother with a dog leash on her neck and panties with a hole in which her bleep peeked through. Also more hardcore porn pictures of the woman that we call mom. We looked at each other not sure what to do, and proceeded to get that drawer inside. When we got back out, the pictures had gone. Our mom/dad must have picked it up. Or the neighbor. Anyway, no word was ever spoken about it. Even my seasoned I never did. My dad always acted like he was dirt poor, even though I knew otherwise. He would always have an excuse to not go somewhere or to do stuff with me and my brother that had him spending money. Well, one day my dad and brother went to the store, so I snuck in his computer room and went through his filing cabinet. There were his bank records, and sure enough he had over 50k in the bank just collecting interest. He'd take 1 week out of the year and go on vacation, but it would only be him and whoever he was dating. Never once took my brother and I. Always left me heartbroken knowing that my dad would rather make excuses than to spend time with his own kids. On a side note, after I found the bank's records, I snooped through his computer and found all the porn sites he was paying for.